In this video, we are discussing the now viral article from The Atlantic on why Americans stopped hanging out. We're going to unpack it, going to react to it, and also talk about what we can do as a result of it. So here we go. Welcome to Accidentally Intentional, where our goal is to destroy loneliness by building rich relationships. And in this episode, I'm going to be taking you through the article that was posted from The Atlantic a couple weeks ago that's now gone viral because of everything that was discussed in it. It is pretty startling to read, and we're going to read most of it together. I've read through it once and saved all my reactions for this video, so you're getting everything fresh and unfiltered for me because my heart's passion is for everyone to have a rich relationship at minimum in their life, if not multiple, because we believe here that relationships are one of the greatest gifts that we can ever be given. So let's jump into it. Okay, we have this article from The Atlantic written by Derek Thompson, Why Americans Suddenly Stopped Hanging Out. And this really puts it to our attention here, the importance of it, because it says too much aloneness is creating a crisis of social fitness. And so as he's going through the article, he starts by taking us basically back to where we were in the 70s. One of the greatest decades, everyone was all about camaraderie, togetherness, but then we've slowly been shifting a different direction. From 2003 to 2022, he writes, American men reduced their average hours of face-to-face socializing by about 30%. For unmarried Americans, the decline was even bigger, more than 35%. For teenagers, it was more than 45%. Boys and girls ages 15 to 19 reduced their weekly social hangouts by more than 3 hours a week. People are not spending time together anymore. Now, I love this distinction he makes. He says, aloneness is not loneliness. Not only that, one might point out the texture of aloneness has changed. Solitude is less solitary than ever. With all the calling, texting, emailing, work chatting, DMing, and posting, we are producing unprecedented terabytes of interpersonal communication. If Americans were happy about themselves, about their friends, about their country, then whining about parties, one would feel silly. Now, this is a great point he makes right here, is saying aloneness is not loneliness, but in our aloneness, are we actually, ever alone? Because we don't let ourselves feel that type of potential boredom or isolation as much as trying to grab at the next thing to stop us from that uncomfortable feeling that we have. So what is solitude? How do we capture and get to a place of solitude where it's not without want as much as just being content about what we have in the moment in front of us and being content with the people that are in our lives in person, not as much about followers or engagement or anything like that. And it really is a funny point. If Americans were happy, then why are we whining about parties that we have to attend? Now, you might be watching this and you're like, oh, I wish I was invited to a party. And keep listening if that's you. The next sentence he says, but for Americans in the 2020s, solitude, anxiety, and dissatisfaction seem to be rising together in lockstep. I mean, we're going to see all the research and how it's pointing to that. The share of young people who say they have a close friend has plummeted. And we know this to be true because one of the most powerful statistics that this entire podcast is based around is the statistic that 70% of people don't have a single person that they can call in the middle of a crisis. Who would you call in a crisis? You'd call a close friend. So if we know that 70% of people don't have anyone to call, then that means we are in a close friend crisis. We are in a relational crisis. And what he says next is, I don't think hanging out more will solve every problem. Sure, there's a lot that needs to be done. But I think what he's trying to capture in this article is that we have to be willing to want to solve that problem. Not for everybody else, for ourselves. I do think every social crisis in the US could be helped somewhat if people spent a little more time with other people and a little less time gazing into digital content that's designed to make us anxious and despondent to the world. Now, you may or may not be up to date on all of the hearings that Meta and all of these social media companies are in the middle of. They're coming under fire because it is very clear, and they had knowledge and data and proof that they were creating apps to make people addicted to them. And that as a result of those findings, they actually knew about the fact that anxiety, depression, potential suicide rates were on the rise, and they didn't do anything about it. Now, that's all I'm going to say about that, other than that's concerning. That's concerning that we are just falling into this kind of trap mindlessly, completely mindlessly. And we need to do something for ourselves to fix it. And it's going to take discipline, and it's going to take self-control, which I will be the first to tell you, I am not one who's excellent at either of those things. But it's becoming more clear and more pressing every single day that we have to do something about this. Americans have collectively submitted to a national experiment to deprive ourselves of camaraderie in the world of flesh and steel, choosing instead to grow and grow and grow the time we spend by ourselves, gazing into screens, wherein actors and influencers often engage the very acts of physical proximity that we deny ourselves. It's been a weird experiment, and the results haven't been pretty. So he kind of goes through COVID-19, which I feel like we've heard enough about at this point. You get the point. We've isolated ourselves. As a result, there's been a compounding effect that it's had on us, making us not hang out and be in person as much. Beyond in-person hanging, he says several other forms of socialization have declined by about a third in the past 20 years, including the share of Americans who volunteer and the share of Americans who attend religious services over the weekend. Now, let me pause here, okay? Because a couple episodes ago, we spoke about happiness and the research from Arthur Brooks, who is the Harvard happiness professor. And he said that some of the things that can make you happiest are, one, choosing to volunteer, and another one is having faith in something, in so much as believing that this world is a little bit bigger than just me. And so I attend church, and I am always excited every week to see my friends and see my community, because that is where I've decided to place myself, spend my time, and grow connections and relationships there. And I think what needs to be highlighted right here is that, you know, growing up in a nation where faith was very accessible in ways that it has not yet been or has never been for other nations around the world, it kind of became a default that people would attend, you know, a Sunday service. And by default, you would be placed or spend time around a community and group of people. Yet now that less people are attending religious services, which isn't actually necessarily true across the board for all denominations when it comes to faith, but yet there is a decline comparatively. The important part is we have to choose to put ourselves in a community, period. Whether it's a fitness community, whether it is a hobby community, whether it is, I don't know, it could be anything such as like Alcohol Anonymous if you're someone who's struggling with a certain addiction. I do think that within the next 10 to 20 years, there's going to be a digital anonymous addiction place such as this for people around the world to discuss and get better at this. But the point remains that we need to be able to choose for ourselves and believe we need community. And you don't even need to take anything I'm saying right here to know that to be true. Because if we used to exist in tribes itself were communities. And so without being in the community, you would not figuratively, quite literally, die. You had to be surrounded by people in order to survive. And yet here we are, thousands of years later, finding out the exact same thing to be true. By 2022, this flipped. This trend flipped. The average woman with a pet now spends more time, quote, actively engaged with her pet than she spends hanging out face to face with fellow humans on any given day. I find that fascinating. But that also brings to the forefront the fact that nobody wants to feel alone. Anything that can make us feel part of something or feel seen and loved, we are drawn to by our very nature. Teens are dating less, playing fewer youth sports, spending less time with their friends, and making fewer friends to begin with. In the late 1970s, more than half of the 12th graders got together with their buddies almost every day. By 2017, only 28% did. More than half to 28%. There's very clearly been a striking decline in in-person socializing among teens and young adults, whether it's going to parties, driving around in cars, going to the mall, or just about anything that has to do with getting together in person, says Jean Twenge, a psychology professor at San Diego State University. We're going to share some of her research that's unpacked more in this article, but the point remains that whether you are Gen Z watching this or whether you are a parent of Gen Z, middle school, high schoolers, college kids, it is imperative that we want to create environments where kids want to come together and be a part of something. Not with their phones, with each other. That tactile human connection, seeing each other eye to eye, where body language, tone of voice, where it all is packaged together to create a human experience. Scroll down a little bit more. I want to show you this graph, which really hits home on the gravity of the issue. The percentage of teens who say they go out with friends 2+ times a week. We've gone from 2000, where it was almost 80%, to now 2024, where it is less than 60%. That's a huge decline. And here's the deal. We know it's not just teens. This is all of society. We just have data for teens that we've been able to track and show proof of. Americans are spending less time with other people because they're spending more time with their screens. So this isn't just a thing or a scenario in which it's like, well, I don't really like people. No. It's always being replaced. We're always looking for something to fill that gap and that void in our hearts and our mind. So they're spending more time with their screens, televisions, and phones. The evidence that young people have replaced friend time with phone time is strong. The groups with the largest increase in phone use saw the largest declines in hanging out with friends, strongly suggesting a direct relationship, as if we needed data to point this out. Can any of us go anywhere nowadays without our phones? And if you're saying, yeah, I can, amazing. Thank you for leading the charge, and please continue to do so. The phones are killing us in more ways than one when we let them be masters over us. I mean, you think about just holding a phone in a public setting with somebody. If you're holding a phone, Simon Sinek actually showed this on stage once. If you're holding a phone, someone is less likely to open up, let alone have a conversation with you. Even if it was down, even if you couldn't see it or the phone's just on the table, people are less likely to open up. Why? Because they know, we all know, that this is trying to get every single second of our attention. And I did an episode with Sean Killingsworth and his amazing movement that he's created called the Reconnect movement for Gen Z and specifically college students across the country, where it is phone-free hangouts, quite literally. Gen Z is leading the charge on it. They're getting sick of it because they're the only generation that has gone completely digital, and so they have seen the impacts of what it's doing to them. And a group of them, and a growing group, shall I say, is deciding enough is enough. We want to take our lives back into our own hands. And so some of them are saying goodbye to smartphones altogether. And they're opting for the quote, dumb phones, the ones that don't have internet access, where you can just call and barely text. And so they have these groups on college campuses where they actually put all the phones in a lockbox or a basket and say, you'll get it back in the next hour. But the goal is to strengthen the bonds of human connection where people are having conversations. They're facilitating all these conversations. There's activities for people to be able to be friends once again, face to face. Scrolling down a little bit further, face-to-face rituals and customs are pulling on our time less, and face-to-screen technologies are pulling on our attention more. As we just stated, the inevitable result is a hangout depression. The share of teenage girls who say they experience persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness increased from 36 to 57%. And the share of girls who've said they've contemplated suicide increased 50% in the same decade. What are we doing? What are we doing? This is unacceptable. That stat right there is truly unacceptable. We have people that don't believe life is worth living because what they're seeing on a screen is showing a chasm that's so far about how everybody else's life is versus their own. Meanwhile, those of us who have been in an analog world before a digital world know exactly how fake this is. And that's why I believe Gen Z is on such an unbelievably hungry quest for authenticity, because they want to see something that they can truly and fully believe in and become part of. And it's not on those phones. The rise in teen depression coincides with the proliferation of smartphones and social media. It's very suspicious that teen anxiety and depression really started to take off around 2012 because that's when 50% of Americans owned a smartphone, when social media went from optimal to virtually mandatory, and when smartphones got front-facing cameras. Jean Twenge told me, says the writer. Oh, man. We're not even done with the article, but what really stood out to me about that is this virtually mandatory part. How many, whether you're a parent or not, how many of us have heard about every teenager needing a cell phone to be socially acceptable today? Well, everyone else has one. I can't. Do you want to put me in a position where I'm being bullied and an outcast at school because I don't have one? Well, I think it's getting to the point where we have to confront this and answer that question. What are we willing to sacrifice in order to protect this upcoming generation's psyche, let alone our own? Because behavior is a language. So these younger generations are watching the older ones become more addicted, accustomed, heads down into a digital screen, into a small 5-inch box, instead of looking right in front of them at the person that actually matters most to them. There's also statistics now that are out by the CDC that has revealed that loneliness on the body is more harmful than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The gravity of this cultural moment that we are in cannot be understated, and we have to do something drastic to change it for ourselves, for the people around us that we love, and for the generations that follow, because they are depending on us to change the narrative and change society and how we live as a result. Good relationships are the key to happiness. Now, we discussed this back in the happiness episode. It's actually scientifically proven that what is the longest indicator of longevity in your life is quality relationships. And that same thing, quality relationships, is what makes people happiest. Just as many people are familiar with the concept of physical fitness, they said, we should be equally open to the concept of social fitness. We should care for our relationships as we'd care for our body. I love this sentence. I couldn't agree more. And I also think we need to think about everything when it comes to this, because how many of us read that sentence and said, wait, well, I don't really care for my body that well, to be honest. It all works together. Those disciplines, those habits all work in tandem. If you don't care about your relational health, Are you caring about your physical health? Are you caring about your mental health? Are you caring about your emotional health? Are you caring about your spiritual health? Every part of the facets of our life and all the different health options make us us. And we need to take this seriously. Now, I use the term relational wealth because that is what building rich relationships means to me. So the same way that people understand what it means to be wealthy financially, we have the ability to do with hard work, with investments into a lot of people and a lot of time investments, we have the ability to create relational wealth for ourselves as well. And so social fitness and relational wealth, these are concepts we definitely need to fully lean into. And if you've made it this far in the video, I know that you agree because you want to make this a priority. That is why we are all here. We come into this world craving the presence of others. True. I mean, yes, that's a sentence and there's a whole paragraph that says more about that. But think about it. We all have innate desires to be fully known and to be fully loved. And you could be watching this saying, honestly, I don't have that desire anymore. Why? The only reason that you wouldn't have that desire anymore is because one or multiple people burned you or showed up as less than that and did not meet those expectations of fully seeing you and fully loving you and making you feel fully known. But all relationships are a risk. And I think through this article, it's very clear that it is a risk worth taking. We're struggling. We're all struggling as a society because there's so much we have to think through and make decisions on every day. Such as, how do I want to show up in the world today? Do I actually want to be authentic? Do I actually want to be my vulnerable self? Because the last time I did that, someone took advantage of me. And life's hard, so it's really easy to become skeptical, right? And to become pessimistic. But I wonder how much more powerful and freeing as a society we would be if we decided to go first. Go first meaning that even if you don't see proof of it in your life, you choose to believe that you're worth having incredible relationships, rich relationships even, and that you might have to be awkward and put yourself out there and ask someone to hang out. And let's not pretend we can't find places to hang out nowadays. Okay, there are so many cool companies that are coming up with amazing concepts. Topgolf. I just went to an indoor putting place last night. They have the same for arcade places. Alcohol doesn't need to be involved. Food doesn't even need to be involved anymore. You can go to a park. You can go get coffee. The options for finding a community are endless. The hurdle is believing that we're worth it, and two, being willing to take the actions that coincide with that. Dr. John Deloney, who's been a friend of mine and a friend of our podcast, had a caller who was a 60-year-old man call into his show nearly in tears saying, John, I don't have any friends and I don't know how to make any. And John had some pretty crazy ideas for him, and I loved how crazy they were, and it actually inspired me. Here's what he said. He said, well, here's what I'd do. I'd put a sign in your front yard that says, 60 years old, looking for friends. Knock on the door. I'd love to have dinner or have coffee or something like that. Now, stop any other thought you might have. Let's just look at that at face value. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Talk about being extremely vulnerable and also honest of what you're hoping for and your intentions. How many of us are willing to go up to a stranger and say, hey, what's your name? I'm Zoe. Nice to meet you. I'm actually new to this town. I'd love to make friends. Would you be willing to get coffee with me? Or insert wherever you want to go. Do you want to go for a walk next week? Can you schedule it? I'd love to hear more about your life, know about this town, what I need to know, and bringing people into your world. Did you know that people want to help? You know how I know that to be true? Because when's the last time someone asked you for help and you got excited? Now, I'm not talking about somebody who's always asking you for help. I'm talking about someone who wanted your help because you bring a unique value to them as a person. You were excited. I'm always excited when I get that, when someone asks for my help with relationships, because I then become invested in the outcome. We're all like that. We all want the opportunity to be able to help other people. But it takes someone, which is us, having the courage to ask for that. There's a lot more I can say about this because it is the thing I'm most passionate about. But here's what I want to say. You are worth having these incredible relationships. And I do an entire starter kit for building relational wealth. You can find it up here. It's a series of 5-6 videos that breaks down everything you need to know in order to have your toolkit ready to start making friends, no matter how old or what stage, age, phase you are in life. One of the things I think we should think through is honestly writing down, what type of a friend do I want in my life? What type of friend do I need? Because we all need friends. And once you write that down, ask yourself, am I this type of friend? Am I the type of friend that's trustworthy and loyal and vulnerable? Because we have to be willing to go first and be that ourselves in order to find this everywhere else in the world. Does it then immediately become easy? No. Is it worth the fight? Yes. Is exercise and personal fitness worth the fight? Yes. Is investing into your future financially worth the fight? Yes. Is finding a faith community where you can believe something with like-minded people and go through life together worth it? I absolutely believe. Yes. All of your investments are worth it, but we have to start seeing life as an investment. How much time are we going to stop investing into entertainment via digital formats, just with ourselves? And are we willing to be courageous enough to replace that investment in allocation of time, money, and whatever else into the people in the world around us? Between me and you, I think we're capable of it. And I want to be the first to tell you, I believe in you. You're not alone. We're doing this together. Let's go.